My brother was grinning at me from across the boardroom table. That slow, satisfied grin he'd been practicing his whole life, the one that meant he'd already won. My mother was sitting beside him, hands folded in her lap, not looking at me. The notary was clicking his pen, and I was the only one in that room who knew the document they were about to sign didn't exist. Let me back up. Our grandmother, my dad's mother, immigrated from rural Nova Scotia to Toronto in the 60s with $30 and a sewing kit. She built a textile business from nothing, not from family money, not from her husband's connections, from nothing. By the time I was born, her company occupied a small industrial unit in Etobicoke and employed 11 people full time. By the time I turned 20, that same company was worth just under $4 million. Gran was specific about one thing her entire life. She was specific and deliberate, and she wrote things down. She kept a binder, an actual 3-ring binder with tabs and plastic sleeves where she tracked every decision she'd ever made about the business. Succession plan, asset distribution, charitable giving, everything. When I was 17, she sat me down at her kitchen table in Scarborough, the one with the yellow linoleum and the window that never closed quite right, and she showed me that binder. She told me she was leaving me 49% of the company. Your brother gets the same, she said, but the controlling share goes to you, because you'll use it right. I didn't understand what that meant at 17. I thought she was just saying I was her favorite in a polite, deniable way. I understand now. My brother. I call him by what we always called him growing up, which is exactly nothing affectionate. He was 4 years older, and he had a talent for being believed. Not for being honest, for being believed. There's a difference. He could walk into any room and in 20 minutes convince everyone in it that he was the most competent, most reasonable, most tragically misunderstood person present. He'd been doing it since he was 12. My parents rewarded it. My mother especially. She called it charisma. She called it leadership potential. She bought him his first car and paid his deposit on a condo in Liberty Village when he was 26. And she told me she actually said this out loud to my face. He just needs more support. You've always been the one who could handle things. I was a CPA, chartered professional accountant. I've been working at a forensic accounting firm in downtown Toronto since I was 24. And before that, I'd spent 2 years at the provincial tax office. Numbers were not abstract to me. Money left tracks. It always left tracks. When Gran was diagnosed in the winter before last out stage 3, lungs, they caught it later than anyone wanted to admit. I started paying attention. Not because I was paranoid, because I knew my family. The thing about being the capable one is that people stop reporting to you. They stop keeping you informed because they assume you don't need to be. And while everyone was busy assuming I was fine, my brother was having dinners with Gran's estate lawyer. He mentioned it once, casually, in a family group chat. Said he was helping coordinate. My mother responded with 3 heart emojis. I didn't respond at all. I started making calls. Gran passed in March. It was quiet and it was hard, and I won't describe it except to say that her hands looked exactly the same as they always had. Square palms, short nails, a scar on her left thumb from a rotary cutter, and that I sat with her until the very end. And my brother showed up 20 minutes after she was gone. My mother told me afterward that he'd been held up at work. I didn't say anything. The will was to be led 2 weeks later at the office of Gran's estate lawyer, whose firm was on Bay Street. I knew the lawyer. I'd met her once, at Christmas 3 years ago. Sharp woman, old school, the kind who wrote notes in the margins of documents. 4 days before the reading, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was a paralegal from a different firm, a much larger one. She said she was calling to confirm my attendance at the will reading, and she named a date that was 3 days earlier than the one I had on my calendar. I asked her to repeat that. She said the meeting had been rescheduled. She had my name, my address, my relation to the deceased. She said Gran's regular lawyer had retired and the file had been transferred. I thanked her and hung up. Then I called Gran's actual lawyer directly. She had not retired. The meeting had not been rescheduled. She had received no instruction to transfer the file. She sounded by the end of our call like someone trying to remain professional while also being extremely concerned. I told her everything I knew. I asked her to send me the original will again. I asked her to verify the chain of custody. What came back 12 hours later was not entirely surprising but was still deeply unpleasant to look at. Someone had filed an amendment to the will, dated 6 weeks before Gran's death, during the period when she was on her second round of treatment and sometimes slept 18 hours a day. The amendment reduced my share of the business to 10%. It gave my brother controlling interest and my mother a cash disbursement of $80,000 drawn from the business account. The signature looked like Gran's. It wasn't. I know what Gran's signature looks like. I have cards she sent me, birthday cards, Christmas cards. One letter she wrote me when I got my CPA designation, which she mailed, actually mailed in an envelope, because she said email felt like a message you could take back. Her signature has a very specific loop on the G, a break before the last name, a period after her initial. The signature on the amendment had none of those things. I forwarded everything to Gran's lawyer that night. Then I called a colleague of mine, someone I'd worked with at the forensic firm who now did independent document analysis, and I asked her to look at it too, just to have a second set of eyes, just so I wasn't the only person standing in the room saying what I already knew. She called me back in 48 hours. She used the phrase inconsistent stroke pressure and temporal anomalies in the ink composition. What she meant, in plain language, was this was forged, and it was forged recently. I had 3 days before the rescheduled meeting, the fake one, and 6 days before the real one. So I made a decision that some people would call calculated and that I would call tired. I decided to let it play out. I called the paralegal back and confirmed my attendance at the fake meeting. I was pleasant. I said I might be a few minutes late due to transit. She said that was perfectly fine. I did not tell my brother I knew. I did not tell my mother. I spent those 3 days doing two things. First, I worked with Gran's lawyer to file an urgent application with the Ontario Superior Court to flag the suspected document fraud and request an injunction on any transfer of assets until the matter could be reviewed. The court clerk was overworked and underpaid and deeply professionally efficient. The injunction was granted in 47 hours. Second, I went and saw a notary public I trusted, a woman I'd met through a colleague whose office was in a Victorian house on a side street in Cabbager Town. And I had her witness a statutory declaration outlining everything I knew: the amendment, the dates, the comparison analysis, the calls. I had it signed, sealed, and filed before Friday. The morning after fake meeting, I dressed carefully, not dramatically. I wore what I usually wear to client presentations: dark blazer, flat shoes, the kind of clothes that say, I have been doing this for years and I am not here to impress you. I am here to work. I took the subway because I didn't want to think about parking. The boardroom was on the 14th floor of a glass building on Adelaide. My brother was already there when I arrived. So was my mother. There was a man I didn't recognize at the head of the table. Mid-50s, silver cufflinks, the specific kind of warmth that lawyers sometimes perform when they need you to feel relaxed. There was a notary beside him. My brother smiled at me. That smile. I'm glad you came, he said. Of course, I said. Gran would have wanted us all here. He looked, very briefly, like he'd heard something in my voice. Then he decided he hadn't. My mother poured herself water from a pitcher in the center of the table. She didn't offer me any. I sat down and put my bag on the floor and folded my hands and waited. The lawyer, the silver cufflinks one, introduced himself and said that Gran had updated her estate instructions before her passing, and that today they would be reviewing the revised allocation. He used the word revised 4 times in 6 sentences. He slid a document across the table to each of us. I looked at mine. I already knew what it said. My brother picked up a pen. Before anyone signs anything, I said, I'd like to flag something for the record. Silence. My mother looked at me for the first time since I'd sat down. Not warmly. This is a formality, my brother said. Gran was clear about what she wanted. She was, I agreed. That's actually the issue. I took an envelope from my bag. Inside it was a printed copy of the court injunction, the statutory declaration, the document analysis from my colleague, and a cover letter from Gran's actual lawyer, who was, at that exact moment, sitting in her car 2 blocks away on Queen Street West, available by phone. I set it on the table. The Ontario Superior Court has issued an injunction on any transfer of assets from my grandmother's estate pending review of a suspected forged amendment, I said. This meeting has no legal standing. The document you prepared cannot be signed or notarized today. And if it is, everyone in this room becomes party to fraud. The notary stopped clicking her pen. The silver cufflinks lawyer leaned back very slightly in his chair. My brother said, "That's insane." "The document analyst's report is on page 7, I said. She used the phrase inconsistent stroke pressure. There's also a breakdown of the ink dating, which is interesting. My mother said nothing. She was looking at the table. "You can't," my brother started. "I already did," I said, "about 56 hours ago." The meeting ended in 11 minutes. There was no signing. The notary left first quietly, without making eye contact with anyone. The silver cufflinks lawyer gathered his papers and said with considerable effort that he would need to consult with his client. My brother pushed back his chair and stood up and said my name. My full name, the way my mother used to say it when I'd done something unforgivable, like failing to take his side in an argument. And I looked at him, and I didn't say anything at all. My mother put on her coat and walked out without speaking to me. In the elevator going down, I texted Gran's lawyer, "Meeting's over. You can stand down. Thank you." She replied, "Good. Call me Monday." The investigation took 7 months. That is a long time to walk around knowing what you know and not being able to talk about it at work, or at family events, or with most of the people in your life. My closest friend, we've been friends since our second year APA at U of T, and she is the most relentlessly practical person I've ever met. Knew most of it. She came to my apartment in late April and sat on my kitchen floor eating crackers and listening while I explained what was happening. And she said, "Okay, so your brother is going to prison," in the same tone she'd used to say, "Okay, so it's going to rain." I said I didn't know that for certain yet. She said, "No, but you're a forensic accountant and you have a court injunction. He's going to prison." She was mostly right. The RCMP became involved in June, at the point when the investigation expanded beyond the will amendment to include what my brother had been doing with the company's receivables. He had been paying himself a consulting fee to a number company registered in Alberta for work that no one at Gran's business had authorized or could document. Over 14 months. The total came to just under $220,000. My mother's $80,000 disbursement was tied to this. She claimed she hadn't known the source. The investigators were not, based on everything I observed, entirely satisfied with that answer. The estate lawyer who had prepared the forged amendment, the silver cufflinks man, had his practicing certificate suspended pending a law society review. He gave a statement in August. I wasn't in the room for it, but my lawyer was, and she described it afterward as thorough and deeply self-interested. Glan's actual will, the one with the 3-ring binder, the one she'd explained to me at that yellow kitchen table, was upheld. 49% to me, 49% to my brother, which was frozen pending the criminal proceedings. 2% to a community housing charity in Dartmouth that Gran had supported for 30 years. I became the acting director of the company in September. The first thing I did was send a card to each of Gran's 11 employees. Handwritten. Mailed in envelopes. Because she had taught me that some things you don't send by email. The second thing I did was go through the binder. Everything was there. Every decision, every note, every tab she had carefully labeled in her block letter handwriting. There was a section at the back I hadn't seen before, behind a divider that just said, "For later," and inside it was a letter. It was addressed to me. She'd written it in January, 3 months before she died. She wrote that she knew what she was doing with the succession plan and she knew it wasn't going to be simple and she was sorry to leave me the complicated version of things. She wrote that she trusted me not because I was the easiest person in the family but because I was the most honest. She wrote, "Honest people have a harder time in this world because they can't believe how easy dishonest people find it. But they last longer. You'll last." I read it twice in the empty boardroom alone after everyone had gone home. Then I put it back in the binder, behind the for later divider, and I closed it. She was right about the complicated version. She was right about lasting. And she was right that some things you just have to write down, seal, and trust that the right person will eventually open them. The thing I keep coming back to is the binder. Gran didn't build a $4 million business by being lucky or by being loud. She built it by writing things down, by thinking carefully before she acted, and by doing what she said she was going to do. Even when it was inconvenient, even when no one was watching. That's not a small thing. Most people can't manage it for a week. She did it for 50 years. I think about that a lot now when I sit in her boardroom. The same table, different chairs. Sometimes in the early morning before anyone else arrives, when the light comes to the east facing windows and there's nobody asking me anything, I just sit there and think about what it actually costs to be that consistent. To be honest, every single day of your life, in every small decision, until honesty just becomes the structure you live inside. My brother was smart. I want to be fair about that. He was genuinely smart and he understood people and he could read a room faster than almost anyone I've known. But he used all of that to avoid difficulty rather than to do difficult things. There's a version of intelligence that's actually just an elaborate avoidance system. He could convince anyone of anything, which meant he never had to do the slower, harder work of actually being right. He got used to shortcuts, and then, when the stakes got high enough, the shortcuts failed him. The injunction wasn't brilliant, it wasn't some genius move. It was just what you do when you've been paying attention, when you've maintained the kind of professional relationships that make a court clerk take your application seriously. When you've kept your word to enough people over enough years that they're willing to move quickly on your behalf. What looked like a trap was really just the accumulated result of doing things properly for a long time. I think that's what Gran was trying to tell me in that letter. Not that I was smarter than my brother, or more deserving, or better in some uncomplicated way. Just that the long game belongs to people who can hold their integrity intact under pressure. People who don't trade it away when something easier comes along. There were moments during those 7 months when I was exhausted in a way I don't quite have words for. The kind of tired that lives in your chest. When the RCMP interview started, when my mother stopped returning my calls, when I had to sit across from people who were trying to pick apart every decision I'd made, there were nights I genuinely didn't know if I had enough left to keep going. Resilience sounds like a word for motivational posters. What it actually felt like was just getting up the next morning anyway, calling Gran's lawyer anyway, filing the next document anyway. Not because I felt strong, because the alternative was letting people who had forged a dying woman's signature walk away with everything she built. That's what kept me going in the end. Not anger, though there was anger. Not even justice, exactly. Just the clear, simple knowledge that Gran had trusted me to do the right thing, and that trust was worth more than my exhaustion. She was right that honest people have a harder time. She was also right that they last. I'm still here.